Just another dead girl. Underwater. Trigger warning. Implications of death, violence, and sexual harassment. By the time the fisherman finds me, I will have been dead for 33 hours, 6 minutes, and 29 seconds. 18 hours since the police declared me missing. 15 hours since Zoe told my biology teacher that my tent was empty, that I hadn't returned from the party we'd snuck out to the night before. Careful, quiet, every twig a possible snitch. It was exhilarating, our hearts pounding, the smell of pine and seaweed thick in the air, and the moon a perfectly curved sickle. Zoe held my sweaty hand and didn't let go until we'd passed the tents and joined the others by the lake. The music on someone's phone was turned down just low enough for us to make out Billie Eilish's raspy voice. One of the guys offered us a beer, kept cool in the pitch black, lurking water. I remember thinking I couldn't tell where the lake ended and the forest began. The first article, published by a local newspaper, reads, "Promising high school student missing after night swim in lake." Shortly after, the Water Rescue Service and Fire Brigade take over the search. Dogs comb the area, their noses trailing through the damp earth. A human chain forms, people moving slowly through the woods, eyes scanning for any sign of me. Even a helicopter hovers overhead, its whirring blades slicing through the heavy, charged air. The search drags on for hours, stretching into the twilight. Yet the woods remain silent. The police begin to ask questions. When was she last seen? What was she wearing? Had she been drinking? Did she seem out of character? Angry? Sad? Suicidal? No, no, and no. She was singing. She was dancing. She seemed happy. When the fisherman finds my body, miles away from where I was last seen, certainty sets in. The autopsy reveals a hematoma on my head and purple spots behind my ears. The coroners examine the water in my lungs and confirm that I wasn't dead before entering the water. I died by drowning. My classmates are questioned again. Zoe claims to have left early, while I stayed behind with her twin brother, Tom, who has been in love with me since middle school. Tom's behavior strikes the police as odd. He insists he barely spoke to me, despite people seeing us leave the party together for a few minutes. When my body is examined, traces of Tom's skin are found on my clothes, trapped between the fabric layers. Still, Tom sticks to his story, perhaps because the truth would embarrass him for some reason. Or maybe he's just afraid of the questions that would follow and the scrutiny that might come with them. Tom is right, you know, in the broadest sense. We really only exchanged 3 or 4 sentences that night, but only because Tom's mouth was otherwise occupied with me. I had enjoyed every second of it. And looking back, I wish I'd given him a real chance. But I was too worried about what other people might think. So, as usual, I brushed him off, leaving him to walk away from the party, feeling hurt. Cassandra insists she heard Zoe and me arguing that night, just before Zoe headed back to the campsite. According to her, we were fighting over Tom. Of course she would say that. What else would two girls argue about, if not a boy? Cassandra even claims that Zoe pushed me, though Zoe denies it vehemently. She denies discussing Tom at all, insisting it was about something else, something that wouldn't come to light until much later, when our biology teacher became a suspect. But Cassandra holds firm to her version. The thing about Cassandra is that she's always been a shadow, the kind of girl whose name teachers forget after 2 weeks of spring break. Kelly, Cindy, Carrie. Something with a Z, though, right? So, when she finally gets the chance to talk to the police and be part of the investigation, she jumps at it. Unfortunately, Cassandra isn't much help to the investigators. She leaves the party at 2 a.m., at just 40 minutes before I die, leaving me alone with a group of guys who've brought along some tranquilizers. Sitting next to them felt like being stuck in a fever dream, where Jacques Derrida explains quantum physics at a frat party. At some point, I decided it was time to head back. One of the guys casually asked if I needed someone to walk with me, and I said yes, but no one moved. I glanced back, the campsite faintly visible through the cold, white light filtering through the pines. It was only a few meters away, just beyond the trees. I'd walked this path for days, never once feeling threatened by the shadows in the bushes. But tonight, that sinking feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Still, I refused to be that girl, the one who got scared at every creak in the dark, the one who needed someone to hold her hand for a few steps. So I stood up and said I'd walk alone. Instead of sticking to the dark trail, though, I decided to take a small detour along the riverbank. A bit longer, a bit lighter, and hopefully a bit safer. One of the guys told me to text him when I made it to my tent. But when I didn't, no one even noticed. 16 days after my death, suspicion begins to shift toward our biology teacher. Devin, one of my classmates, reveals that he had felt ill that night and went looking for the teacher's tent, only to find it empty. Soon after, the teacher's behavior takes a strange turn. He starts making inconsistent statements that don't add up. One day, he calls Zoe into his office after class, where he insists that his earlier proposal to her before the trip had been nothing but a joke. She understood that, right? It was sarcasm, he says, claiming that what he really meant was that if she wanted to improve her grades, she should consider attending a tutoring service. And this is where Cassandra steps in for the final time. she confesses that she visited our biology teacher after the party and that they went to the boathouse, where, according to her, nothing bad happened. He was just there for me. The biology teacher is immediately suspended, but the case against him has nothing to do with mine, as Cassandra's alibi clears him. Meanwhile, the suspicions surrounding Zoe and Tom are too weak to pursue. My case remains unsolved, and eventually people begin to accept the idea that it was just a tragic accident, that I must have hit my head when I jumped into the water. They agree that I seemed unhappy, not just that night, but in general, and that my relationship with my parents, who expected me to excel in everything, was strained. Perhaps the pressure had finally got to her. It's all unsatisfying, of course. Unsatisfying for the local magazine, whose updates eventually dry up. Unsatisfying for the police, left with yet another unsolved case on their desk. Unsatisfying for my parents, who, decades later, will say in an interview that not a day goes by that they don't think of their little girl. Maybe one day, a classmate will write a college essay about my case, reflecting on how it taught them that life can end in an instant. Maybe my story will end up on a true crime podcast. Or perhaps Netflix will stretch it into a tightly structured 8-episode miniseries, where my body is discovered just 3 minutes in. Enough time for viewers to decide if they'll keep watching. Or maybe none of this happens, and I'll fade away like countless other women who are silenced every day simply for being born the wrong sex. It doesn't matter who profits from my story. It doesn't even matter if they eventually find the 2 men I crossed paths with on my way back to the campsite in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of this matters, because in the end, I'm just another dead girl underwater. Reality checked. Maggie stared out the kitchen window, her brow knitted in quiet contemplation as she waited for her coffee to finish brewing. The sun poured through the window, warm and radiant. Yet something felt off. It had rained throughout the night. She recalled the rhythmic pitter-patter against her bedroom window and the wind wailing through the trees. The forecast had called for more storms well into late afternoon. However, outside, the world looked untouched, as if the night's downpour had never happened. She recalled having drinks with her best friends from college last night at the new upscale lounge downtown. Lori had been eager to check out the exclusive rooftop bar, but the rain had forced them to stay inside. Instead, they gathered in one of the lounge's sleek, dimly lit sections, sipping mojitos and catching up. Lori had always dreamed of becoming a corporate attorney, and after years of relentless studying and grueling internships, she had finally landed a position at one of Pittsburgh's top law firms earlier this year. It was all she had ever wanted, and from the way she spoke about it, the long hours and high stakes didn't faze her in the slightest. Sammy and Chloe also seemed to have settled comfortably into their dream careers. Sammy, with her sharp wit and boundless creativity, was making a name for herself in marketing, crafting campaigns for major brands. Chloe, whom she had known since 3rd grade and always the most compassionate of the group, had pursued a career in healthcare, working as a pediatric nurse, the job she had dreamed of since childhood. As Maggie sat there, she couldn't help but wonder if she was the only one still searching for a sense of purpose, trapped in a routine she couldn't escape. Suddenly, the coffee pot beeped, a sharp, cheerful sound, as if proudly announcing the completion of its task. The abrupt noise jolted Maggie from her thoughts, pulling her away from the window. With a sigh, she grabbed the pot and poured the steaming coffee into her oversized pit mug. She and her friends had bought matching mugs from the university shop, a sentimental keepsake to mark their transition from students to University of Pittsburgh alumni. Back then, they had imagined themselves stepping into bright, promising careers, proudly flaunting their school spirit in their new offices. But as Maggie wrapped her fingers around the familiar ceramic, she couldn't ignore the nagging truth. Her future hadn't turned out the way she once envisioned. Maggie took a sip of her coffee and immediately winced at the bitterness, the sharp taste jolting her from her distracted thoughts. She'd forgotten to add the creamer. Heading toward the refrigerator, a realization settled over her. It was Sunday, grocery day. With a resigned sigh, she set down her mug, shuffled to her bedroom to change, then grabbed her purse and keys and headed out the door. The moment she stepped outside, the air was warm and rich with the scent of sun-soaked earth and blooming wildflowers. No trace of petrichor, no lingering dampness on the pavement. It was as if the storm she so vividly remembered had never happened at all. Maggie swallowed, her throat dry and tight. Something was off. She could feel it in her bones. An uncanny sense that the world had shifted on its axis while she slept. She glanced across the street and noticed her neighbors gathered on their lawns, laughing and chatting as if it were a holiday. Odd, she thought. But what unsettled her most was Mr. Burns. The older man was usually a storm cloud of irritation, no matter the day. He'd spent his life working at the same furniture store his great-great-grandfather had built, forever grumbling about long hours and slow employees. Just yesterday, after another exhausting Saturday shift, his voice had carried across the street, complaining about sluggish junior workers, while his wife, Mrs. Burns, stood by the door, nodding in passive agreement, with an umbrella in hand as he stomped into the house. But today, he was all smiles, chatting with the Morgans and the Wilsons, laughing as if he didn't have a single care in the world. Just then, Mr. Burns looked over, spotted her, and waved. "Good morning, Maggie." "Good morning, Mr. Burns," Maggie said, her voice tinged with bewilderment. He grinned and called out, "When you get a chance this week, stop by the store. I'll give you a discount on any furniture you want. We just received an investment, and things are really looking up." "Oh, wow, that's wonderful," Maggie replied, trying to mask the confusion on her face. Mr. Burns had never spoken to her before. A grunt or a quick nod was all she ever got. It was always Mrs. Burns who was the social one. Maggie's skin prickled. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she climbed into her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Something definitely isn't right, she thought. First, the weather seemed odd, and now her neighbor was acting like an entirely different person. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I didn't sleep well, and the mojitos from last night aren't sitting well with me. But no matter how she tried to rationalize it, every instinct screamed that something was undeniably wrong. The drive to the grocery store was oddly surreal. Streets that normally peppered with Sunday morning traffic were unsettlingly quiet. The few cars she passed moved at an unhurried pace, their drivers smiling and waving as if caught up in some unspoken festivity. Pedestrians strolled along the sidewalks with a light-hearted spring in their step, while dogs pranced happily alongside their humans, tails wagging as if the entire world was enveloped in an unfamiliar sense of joy. As she pulled into the parking lot of Greenfield's Market, her unease deepened. The vast stretch of asphalt, usually packed with cars on a Sunday morning, was nearly empty. Only a handful of vehicles sat scattered across the grocery store lot, gleaming under the strangely intense sunlight like polished gems. She cautiously eased into a parking space near the entrance and cut the engine. For a moment, she just sat there, fingers still resting on the steering wheel as she scanned her surroundings, trying to steady her thoughts. "What is going on?" she whispered to herself. Finally, after calming herself, she grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. The door closed shut behind her, the sound echoing across the parking lot, unnervingly loud against the surrounding stillness. As she approached the store, the automatic doors slid open with an almost too cheerful whoosh, releasing a wave of cool, conditioned air. The familiar fluorescent glow spilled onto the pavement, blinding her momentarily, forcing her to blink rapidly to adjust her eyes. Her gaze landed on the store employees gathered at the entrance, their faces lit with excitement as they chatted and laughed. They held a large banner that read, "Welcome to Greenfield's Market. Happy grand reopening. A new beginning awaits." A grand reopening? This surprised Maggie. She had been at this store just a few days ago, and there had been no sign of renovations, no announcements, no changes, nothing to suggest something like this was happening. She forced a smile at the employees as she walked past, gripping her purse handle tightly. Grabbing a cart, she headed toward the produce section, trying once again to shake off the uneasiness rising in her chest. Maggie quickly grabbed her usual grocery items and a few snacks, hurrying toward the register. Despite the small number of customers, the store hummed with an unusual liveliness. As she made her way through the aisles, everything seemed different. The store fully stocked the shelves with fresh produce, neatly arranged in vibrant displays. Maggie couldn't believe what was happening. This wasn't just a grand reopening. It felt like an entirely new store. Yet everything looked exactly as it always had. As she fumbled with her wallet, she heard someone call her name. "Maggie, so nice to see you today. How are you?" It was Jen from her yoga class. Maggie barely managed a smile as she turned to face her. "I'm good. Just doing a little shopping," she replied, her voice flat with a forced smile. "Oh, I totally get it." Jen chuckled. "I'm getting ready for the week too. Can't wait. You won't believe it, but I got a promotion to regional manager last Thursday. Can you believe it? I'm doing what I always wanted." Maggie froze. "Wait, what? I thought you said you hated your job. You even told me you were looking for something else, even if they offered you a promotion." Jen placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder, her face glowing with excitement. "Not anymore. It's my dream job now, Maggie. Isn't it amazing? It feels like a new beginning." Maggie felt a wave of nausea rise in her stomach. Her head spun, and her heart began to race. This didn't feel right. How could everything change so suddenly? The world felt like it was wrapped in some strange, happy haze. How was everyone so cheerful? They continued sharing a little small talk and hugged goodbye just as the cashier finished ringing up Maggie's items. But Maggie's mind was miles away. As if on autopilot, she barely noticed the total as she grabbed her bags and hurried out. Slipping into her car, she leaned back in the seat, feeling disoriented. What was going on? I need caffeine," she muttered, hoping the words would ground her. She headed to the local cafe, desperate for a mocha to shake the eerie feeling that had taken over her, hoping it would wake her up, both literally and figuratively. As Maggie stepped into the cafe, she was taken aback by the atmosphere. It wasn't the usual hectic, impatient crowd, with long lines and customers in a rush. Instead, the cafe was filled with a relaxed energy. People were chatting casually, laughing, and smiling as they sipped their drinks. Then, out of nowhere, one of her co-workers from the hotel, Tim, walked in. His face lit up with a big grin. Their eyes met, and he waved enthusiastically as he made his way toward her, skillfully weaving through customers who were leaving. "Maggie, how are you?" Tim called out, his voice full of excitement. "I'm hanging in there," Maggie replied, still trying to make sense of the strange energy in the air as he joined the line behind her. Tim worked as a bartender at the hotel and was also an aspiring musician, playing local gigs with his band. "Maggie, you won't believe it." Tim's eyes were sparkling as he leaned in closer. "I just signed a huge deal." "What? No way. Congratulations, Tim," Maggie exclaimed, her surprise matching the excitement in his voice. Tim couldn't contain his joy. "Yeah, my band got signed to a record label yesterday. It's my dream, and it's happening." Maggie shouted along with him, her mind still on guard. As Maggie picked up her mocha and exchanged goodbyes with Tim, she slowly made her way to the cafe door, still trying to process what she'd just heard. She was genuinely happy for him, but it felt like everyone's life was suddenly falling perfectly into place. Everyone except hers. She stepped outside into the warm air, the cafe's artificial ambiance fading behind her. As her foot hit the pavement and the fresh air brushed her face, a shiver ran through her, a silent reminder that something was wrong. The streets remained unnervingly serene. Everywhere she looked, people seemed to be exactly where they were meant to be. As she drove home, the familiar scene mirrored the one she had seen on her way to the store. She passed a man sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook, his face radiating quiet contentment. A woman jogged by, her expression one of pure determination, as if every step brought her closer to her passion. Even the baristas at the cafe earlier seemed to move in perfect harmony, clearly in their element. It was as if the world had shifted into some perfect version of itself, where everyone had found their calling. Maggie's stomach tightened as she pulled into her driveway, the weight of the day settling in. The laughter, the smiles, the overwhelming sense of satisfaction. It all felt surreal and too perfect. She quickly collected her groceries and rushed into her apartment, her haven from the unsettling aura of perfection that seemed to envelop everyone around her. How could everyone else be so content, so perfectly aligned with their passions, while she felt like she was just existing? The world outside her window seemed too vibrant, too flawless. The more she thought about it, the more it felt like a carefully crafted facade, one that taunted her with its perfection, mocking her unfulfilled aspirations. After putting away the groceries, she glanced out the window and noticed the sky had darkened. Was it that late already? The day had passed in a blur. With a sigh, She turned her attention to getting her uniform ready for work. She mentally ran through her usual Monday routine. Oh, that's right, she reminded herself. I need to meet with Mr. Carrollson about booking the VIP hall for this week's seminar. Since the large banquet hall is undergoing emergency renovations. Are you happy, Maggie? The thought surfaced unexpectedly. Is this really what you want? 2 years from now? 5? 10? The questions lingered, unsettling and impossible to ignore. No, I'm not happy, she whispered at first, then repeated louder. I'm not happy. I'm a 29-year-old front office supervisor, stuck in a monotonous routine, she cried out, her voice breaking as tears spilled down her cheeks. Her voice trembled with frustration as she continued, her emotions pouring out unchecked. This isn't what I wanted. This isn't the life I dreamed of. She dropped to the floor, fists tightly clenched, tears streaming down her face, her voice breaking with every breath. My dreams, my life, everyone around me is thriving, doing what they love, and I'm just stuck. The realization crushed her. The contrast between her stagnant reality and the world's perfect harmony pressing in like an unbearable weight. Seeing her friends last night had left her feeling small, inadequate. They had all progressed into their ideal careers. And when the conversation had focused on her, she attempted to joke and dismiss it with a nonchalant, "Oh, I just changed direction." But the truth was harder to admit, even to herself. Somewhere along the way, ambition had quietly given way to stability. The drive she once had, the fire that pushed her forward, had dimmed, replaced by routine and practicality. And now, as she neared 30, she woke each morning with a dull, persistent ache of regret, haunted by the question, why had I just simply settled for this life? She had long since convinced herself that she was fine, that comfort and security were enough. But were they? Seeing her friends thrive, their eyes alight with passion for the things they loved, had stirred something restless inside her. Do you keep going like this? Waking up every day to the same boring routine, letting time slip through your fingers? Or do you finally take a stand, make a change, and pursue the life and career you truly want? The thought gave her chills. Change was terrifying, but an unfulfilled life was worse. If she didn't decide now, would she still be here, years from now, trapped in the same cycle, suffocating under the weight of what-ifs? She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. The choice was hers. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to take the steps necessary to make the change. Maggie felt the weight of the day finally lift, the uneasiness that had clung to her dissipating. As she climbed into bed, A sense of determination settled over her. She was ready to embrace change, to carve out a future she truly wanted. Soon after she drifted to sleep, a loud, thunderous boom jolted her awake. Her eyes snapped open, blinking rapidly as she tried to gather her bearings. Rain pounded against the window, the storm outside mirroring the confusion swirling inside her. Half asleep, she reached for her phone. The screen lit up. 5:34 a.m. Sunday. Squinting, she frowned. Wait, Sunday? Did I read that right? She gasped, sitting up quickly, her heart racing. That couldn't be right. She had just lived through an entire day. She had gone shopping, talked to Jen, seen Tim, struggled with her emotions. How could it possibly be Sunday morning again? Scrambling for answers, she lunged for the TV remote and turned it on. The menu flashed across the screen. Sunday, 5:35 a.m. Her pulse roared in her ears. Oh, my goodness. Was it all just a dream? She whispered, her mind racing to make sense of it. A breathless, incredulous laugh escaped her. It was all just a dream. A weird, unsettling dream. Yet, as the initial shock settled, another thought took its place. It had felt so real, so vivid, like she had actually lived it. But more than that, it had forced her to confront the very things she had been avoiding. Her doubts, her fears, and her regrets. Seeing her friends had been the catalyst, but the dream had been the wake-up call. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't merely just a dream. Maybe it was a sign to stop waiting for the world to change for her. There's still time to pursue her dreams and embrace new beginnings. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be exciting. The veil bloom. Elwyn absorbed the gentle coastal wind as it caressed her face from where she sat within the moors that lined her village. Stray wisps from her plaited, brown, gold-streaked hair broke free as it was picked up by drafts. Distant sounds of the nearby market where she worked were a pressing reminder that she had stolen extra minutes to escape work duties. The red knitted hat protecting her ears played tug of war with the increasing gusts that rippled through the purple heather as she ran back towards the busy village, only looking down to ensure she did not step on any wildlife going about their day. Without warning, a darkness encroached the sky, and a slow, thick mist curled around the young woman's path. Elwyn became a static pillar of fear, watching the tendrils of mist reaching out and parting the heather, beckoning her to change her path, unable to sense beyond the darkness that strangled out the rest of the world. Elwyn tensely focused her vision on what the dark magic revealed. Something was glowing intensely. Elwyn tenderly progressed her nimble feet, feelings of fear and interest arguing with one another. She came upon a ruby-red thorned bush, isolating an intense, majestic amethyst glow beneath it. A faint whisper trickled into Elwyn's ears. The bramble peeled itself, exposing the velvet, petaled, regal-like flower bud glistening with crystal dewdrops. "The tide obeys the moon," a female voice sang, prompting the rose to bloom fully before Elwyn's widened eyes. "But not all who guide you wish you to sail true." Before she could repeat the phrase in her head, the darkness sank away into the moors, leaving no trace of its sudden presence. The purple rose remained in Elwyn's hand for only a second before she carefully stuffed it into her pocket as voices came booming from the village, indicating that she had indeed been away too long. Looking and finding no traces of the encounter, she fled for the market. As Elwyn approached her father's stall, she could hear murmurations from the fellow tradesmen. Shouting orders came from customers who bartered prices on fabrics and fresh fish. "Did you see the weather change?" Elwyn hastily asked as she removed her hat and jacket, messily placing them onto the upturned veg crates in front of the stall. "Never mind the damn weather. Get peeling these damn carrots for supper." He tossed a knife to Elwyn and kicked an empty bucket next towards her feet. He was only strict from the grief of losing his love and their newborn daughter in childbirth in recent years. Frustrated, Elwyn perched herself on a stool and began carving at a carrot stump. Even if she told her father, he wouldn't believe her. The rugged orange skin tumbled into the bucket between her feet as her eyes fixed with intrigue on the powerful purple rose that seemed to glisten from the adjacent pocket. "It's a veil bloom, if you were wondering," came a voice full of wisdom and assurance from the front of the tent. Elwyn glanced up to see a tall, thin, yet toned male figure bent over, perusing at the cabbages. His eyes pined towards the purple veil bloom, peeping out of the brown jacket pocket. The flower's quiet, luxurious vibrance seemed out of place and would surely be noticed by a knowing collector's eye. Elwyn glanced quickly towards her father, hoping she would not be heard. But he remained engrossed in organizing the stock in the back of the tent. "What do you know of them?" Elwyn stopped peeling and fixed a softened stare at the male. Her wide eyes probably revealed too much as she hoped for answers. Had she been cursed? She submissively looked toward the flower, phantom feeling its hard thorns against her fingers. "Only what the legend states," Vaska answered. "It's like finding a four-leaf clover. Just lucky." He picked up a cabbage and placed it under his arm. "My name is Vask. My family own a stall on the outskirts of the village. In my spare time, I am not ashamed to say that I am an anthophile." Vaska took out a small pocket-sized leather sketchbook. He opened it to reveal small flowers pressed neatly between the pages, each one secured with a small bit of clear tape. Elwyn tentatively leered over, to see sprigs of lavender and small bouquets of daisies married together. Between parchment, she returned her eyes to Vaska. His emerald eyes cut sharp against the copper curls that framed his softened jawline. I am only interested in where you found it, to satisfy the curiosity of a collector. His eyes flashed to meet hers. I found it in the moors, was all Elwyn offered, indicating that if Vaska was to hold the cabbage in the crook of his arm any longer, he was to pay for it. Embarrassed, he hastily put his hand in his pocket to search for payment. Bringing out 2 silver coins, he placed them on the wooden trade table that bore the produce. Thank you, Vask smiled as he grabbed 2 more cabbages. Keep the change, and if you are into books, come by the stall tomorrow. He kept Elwyn's stare as he retreated into the market crowd. Oi! Shouted Elwyn's father. Are we getting supper tonight, or do I have to finally skin the cat? Her father was stood holding up the rear tent flap, peering in with disappointment. Startled, Elwyn kicked the bucket back between her well-worn leather boots and continued to scalp the skin from the carrot, stealing glances at the veil bloom in wonder of its true intentions. The next day, Elwyn laid out the vegetables onto the wooden trade table as her father stacked the emptied crates from behind the tent. After a night of being plagued by the whispers and visions of dark forests, she desired to know more about the veil bloom. The blood-red thorns pressed into the inner lining of her coat pocket, the tips seeping through to the cotton of her work dress, nipping at her as she moved. Glancing down, she could see the rich velvet petals longingly looking back up at her from within, deep in her coat pocket. She rubbed her thumb over the veil bloom's soft middle. The tightly gathered corolla gently ticked the pad of her thumb. I'm just going to get a new recipe book, Elwyn called to her father. Before he could battle her decision, she broke out into a purposeful stride. Her jacket rippled against the cool air as her arms straightened through the sleeves. She pulled her collar to secure herself against the chill, weaving in and out of tradesmen setting up their stalls, unsure of the faces that surrounded her in a familiar setee of work. She kept her head low, turning on her heels and accepting defeat, trying to find Vaska. Elwyn began to walk back to the southern area of the coastal market. Smells of fresh fish and spices began to fill her nostrils, reminding her stomach of its emptiness. I found it, called a familiar voice. Vaska appeared in her eyeline as she paused to see him run back into his tent and return with a large, tatted book. Veil Bloom. Vaska turned the book towards Elwyn as her hands held the edges to support its weight with him. Located in lands of enchantment, it amplifies one's desires and strength, even with madness. Vaska laughed gently as he impersonated a person riddled with madness and unbalance. Elwyn rejected the book by letting go of the worn-down leather edging and taking a step back from Vaska. It also says it sings lullabies, which probably explains the bit about going mad. Vaska coyly laughed. Elwyn's face turned to deep thought at the young man, voluntarily helping her. I don't desire anything. She paused, wondering if giving him the whole story would favor her or not. What does it say about lullabies? Her voice almost a whisper. The emerald in Vask's eyes began to swirl with intrigue as he gestured for them to go somewhere quieter to talk. The pair sat cross-legged underneath a large oak tree situated on the outskirts of the market. Elwyn's face buried in the book of hidden blooms. Each page so thin, almost translucent, gently flapped between her fingertips. It says in the legend that if the flower starts to glow, you become more powerful. Vaska added, as he looked deeply into at the island of dense forest on the horizon. Isolated by small ocean waters, the enchanted, banished lands leaked darkness. His soft curls caught the wind, his eyes in a thoughtful trance. Elwyn shuddered at the thought of the flower's magic ending up in the wrong hands. I should get back, Elwyn decided as she stood up, ready to face the wrath from her father upon her return. Elwyn woke suddenly, in the dead of night. Sweat dripped from her brow, her long, brown, damp hair that clung to her neck. Help us, came a faint whisper. Elwyn held her breath as she looked around for the voice's owner, the vile bloom, picking it up by its thick green stem. The ruby-red thorns pulsated as she brought it closer to her. Here, help us, Elwyn. It eerily beckoned, suddenly, moving images as if they were her own memories, flooded her mind. She could see a vast forest that crawled with amethyst-colored smoke. A fawn emerged in the clearing, eyes wide with terror, trembling as it proceeded to lie down on the dark moss floor. Elwyn had feelings of blood rushing back to her limbs as she regained consciousness. Her mind lingered with a defiant message. The banished lands needed her help. Her head swiveled around to the oak tree beyond the market border, to see an elbow bent from behind it, as if someone was sat down with their back to it reading. Elwyn gingerly walked over to them, hoping the white cotton shirt belonged to Vaska, and not someone who would alert her father or challenge her in any way. Reassuringly, Vask sat with the heads of bluebells crowded on the bend of his knee as he pressed them into his sketchbook. He looked up to see a panic-stricken Elwyn. What's the matter? His face matched her concerned look. The veil bloom showed me something. Elwyn bleated softly under her breath. I don't know the meaning of the vision or the dream, Vaska started, after hearing the story from Elwyn. He stared again at the island of trees isolated by small ocean waters, wondering if the legend is true of the banished lands. If we go there, do you think we will die? Elwyn asked with hope of a good answer. Vaska didn't respond. He continued his longing stare towards the banished lands. I just know that this dream felt more real than any other I have had. Elwyn continued. The fawn seemed terrified, not of me, but of something I don't think I could see. I think we should try to help it. Elwyn removed the veil bloom from her pocket. Its petals had begun to wilt at the edges, curling in as if it were ready to die. What I have done? Elwyn softly asked herself under her breath. Had she stayed in the market that day, she wouldn't be having nightmares caused by florals. I don't think it's something that you have done, Vaska replied, as his eyes glinted with what seemed like excitement. I think it's more about what you could do to help. Once they beached their stolen rowing boat amongst the cold brown sand on the shore of the banished lands. The atmosphere hung heavy as life drew to a whisper, and then to a flat silence. What does your love of flowers tell you now? Elwyn asked Vaska, with a tint of amusement at the moss-strangled rocks that decorated the forest floor. Not even the twigs beneath their feet made a noise as they progressed deeper into the darkness. Nothing yet, Vaska gently replied, as they descended deeper, deeper into the towering forest. Elwyn tripped on a rock, twisting her ankle slightly. Careful, Vask panted as he grasped a hold of her elbow, prompting a powerful vision into Elwyn's mind, causing her to spiral in between memories, not her own. A hushed murmur echoed in her ears as she saw sights of a large wolf with emerald eyes stalking and hunting on the outskirts of the forest. As if unable to enter beyond the first row of trees, many moons passed in the sky as it returned night after night. A clear voice embedded deep in Elwyn's veins. The tide obeys the moon, but not all who guide you wish you to sail true. The vision of the wolf disappeared into smoke, shifting into flurries of flashbacks. The first time she met the veil bloom flower, the look in Vask's eyes, as he also saw it for the first time that day in the market. As if he pined for it, she remembered. The book thrust into her face that day in the market, as if Vaska knew she would come looking for answers. The veil bloom let out a breath, glowing intensely in agreement. Elwyn had not realized she was now holding it, squeezing it in her paper-thin hand, seething from an anger rooted deep within. He had led her there, purposefully, knowingly. "Help us," came the wispy echo. It repeated with each turn, louder than the last. More voices adding into the chorus of pleas from wildlife. Elwyn fell to the floor as the visions and voices ripped away from her, breathless and her mind aching. She looked up to see Vask's face of worry. "What did you see?" he hastily asked, his face tense with pressure. Everything. Elwyn tried to continue when a creature in the clearing approached. A fawn. An amethyst smoke seeped in from behind the fawn, encasing everything in its wake in a building chaos. Turning to face the fawn properly, Elwyn could see the thick smoke tendrils once again clearing a path, this time around the fawn, who was whimpering, but showing a quiet strength, trying to stand. Elwyn had seconds to think. She turned to Vask. His emerald eyes were gleaming with anticipation at the flower as he turned toward her. "It's working," came Vaska's voice, a rasp with a hint of excitement at the veil bloom glowing intensely. He snatched it from her fingers, contorting his body in obsession and glee. He threw his arms in the air. "I am the most powerful!" But only silence sounded over the whirring mists. Elwyn felt a burning in her veins. Her body acted automatically as she turned to face Vaska, her back to the trembling fawn in protection. The veil bloom turned to ash in Vaska's trembling hand. His face mad. Auburn curls bounced around with every frantic move he made, searching for the bloom. He turned to see Elwyn, her arm outstretched in retaliation towards him. A push at his shoulder from an invisible force turned his face from confused to pure rage at seeing the veil bloom reforming itself in the powerful young woman's pocket, siding with her instead. "Clever girl, but I don't need you," Vaska hissed. "Just the veil bloom now that your kind heart woke it from slumber." His teeth began to form into sharp fangs. His face shifted into a recognizable wolf with emerald eyes. He lunged for Elwyn, jaws agape in blind fury and jealousy. Elwyn darted to the side. A fire of purple light erupted through her veins, streaming out from her fingertips into the wolf's beastly body, knocking him backwards. He steadied himself and leaped high into the air to plant another attack, aiming true to Elwyn and the glowing veil bloom. At once, she coaxed the power from the veil bloom, causing the ground to quake against the sheer force. Gripping against the weight of the power, she lifted and hurled a fatal blow towards the wolf, smashing his limp body against the strongest and tallest trees. Elwyn panted as she looked at the purple illuminations in her veins trickle out and into the fawn behind her. She looked up at the wolf, but only to see his body disintegrate into smoke and disappear into the sky. An escaped curse. Elwyn ran to the fawn, hoping to help it to live, to answer its plea. The soft curve of the fawn's head cupped Elwyn's hand, opening its eyes tenderly. The land around awoke in harmony. The fawn gathered to its feet, bowing proudly to Elwyn, as the gentle black nose touched the floor. A sweep of purple brushed through the land. A once cursed land started to return to life as animals crept out of deep burrows and birds took once again to the sky. The fawn transformed into a majestic stag, concluding the awakening of the misunderstood lands. His aura glowed in the same pearlescent magic that once flowed through Elwyn's veins. She looked down to see her bare arms, and back to the stag, who nodded at her before bouncing off into the thriving atmosphere. Smiling, Elwyn knew her calling now was back to her grieving father. She could never leave him on his own. A thorn dug into her side. The veil bloom remained in her pocket, clasped tightly in a sleeping bud. Its messages sang deep in Elwyn's head as she stroked its velvety casing. It was the flower's magic that gave her the power to connect and calm the land. But it was her kind heart that ultimately saved them all, where pirates came to die. A breath of wind slithered through the ruins and tumbled across his weathered face as he pressed the shard of limestone down the dry ashlar wall, leaving a new etched tally mark. It was a dimly lit chamber inside what was once the world's most notorious pirate prison. For him, it was a sanctuary, a place of refuge. Once the web developer for Shackleford Inc., in a city of skyscrapers, eclectic culture, and ultra-modern technology, Tom Malone scanned his Neanderthal calendar. 240 tallies made up the wall. Some were circled, and only he knew why. Gone were the titles of husband, employee, and neighbor. Given his isolated surroundings, the term castaway was more appropriate. A life filled with country club galas, company retreats, and exotic travel was lost. Survival had replaced living. Tom buttoned his slightly torn flannel shirt and grabbed his coat. He exited the chamber where the wrought iron door, rusted and bent, hung by a single hinge. He moved down the main corridor and stepped through a hollowed-out gap in the outer wall. The Rook, as it was called, was made up of 3 layers, undoubtedly to make escape near impossible for even the smartest buccaneer. If the legends were true, the Rook had seen the likes of Edward Davis and even Black Anthony zipping his coat. He trudged down the path to the beach. This was his routine every day. 2 laps around the island. The overcast sky produced a gloomy horizon, but that was normal for this time of year, or so he assumed. If the tallies were correct, it should be October. The sea was a gray mass of rippling currents. Tom breathed profoundly, absorbing the salty fragrance. The flow of the ambient tide took him back to simpler times when walking on a beach meant hunting for shark teeth, metal detecting for forgotten coins and jewelry, and collecting seashells that made their way into the guest bathroom. Such days seemed as far out of reach as the horizon. Suddenly, he spotted tracks. They snaked from the north before turning about just outside the Rook's outer wall. He recognized the tread patterns as those of a Jeep Wrangler. Tom followed, occasionally glancing over his shoulder. When he reached the familiar bend on the beach, he heard the blast of a horn and dove behind a line of palm trees. Peering through the trunks, he noticed a docked ferry on the beach. A Jeep was climbing the ramp onto the ferry. Personnel in neon-colored jackets moved about the deck. Another search party, he thought. A mustached man in uniform, wearing the same jacket, examined an area in the sand. He spoke into his radio before moving further inland. Tom's heart leapt into his throat when he caught sight of the woman following behind. She wore a yellow raincoat, and her arms were folded tightly as the sea breezes pushed ashore. Her curls flailed and whipped, no matter what direction she faced. She said something to her uniformed companion and advanced toward the tree line. "No," Tom muttered, before slipping back from the bend. He tried to quicken his pace, but the dry sand absorbed every step. Once back in the chamber, he dropped to the floor and focused on slowing his breathing. The acoustics had almost given him away during the initial search months earlier. His heart drummed, and his temporal pulse thumped. He caught his face in the mirror, fragment by the tally wall. It had belonged to the mirror in the cabin cruiser's bathroom before Tom dismantled the $1 million yacht upon his arrival. He gazed at the worn face and graying beard. Then there was the scar, where scalding grease once landed. "Tom!" came the woman's voice. He pressed against the chamber wall like a spy dodging a spotlight. "Mrs. Malone, we've searched the ruins before with no luck." He assumed this was the uniformed man. Tom felt his way down the chamber wall and gripped a loose stone. After a few careful tugs, it came out of its place. He reached into the cavity and pulled out the dust-covered Glock. "Tom!" Squeezing the seasoned grip, he inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and exhaled. His mind traveled to the frost-covered day after his father was buried. Tom opened the gun cabinet and retrieved the pistol his father taught him to shoot with. "This will be yours someday," he would say at the range. Tom choked back the mist that wanted to erupt from his eyes. None of it matters now. Too much has happened. He took another lungful before pursing his lips and blowing out. He eyed the tallied wall and totaled the circled marks. 16. He suspected as much, but now he knew. One bullet remained. "We need to call off the search." He called out, his voice nearer than before. That meant she was too. "No, he's here. I know it," came her distraught and shaking voice. Tom pressed harder to the wall. He hoped the ancient stone could absorb him and conceal any trace of a man desperate to remain in the shadows. "Ma'am, the weather is slowing us down, and the city cannot afford a stranded ferry with personnel on board. Would you stop if it was not if it meant putting others in danger." He ran his free hand over the scar. He traced the tight line of skin that ran from beneath his eye to the corner of his mouth. The sting had subsided long ago, but the hurt ran deep. "Please," she pleaded, "just let me look in here." The man radioed the ferry that he was making a final sweep of the old ruins, and that preparations for departure should begin immediately. For a moment, all was still. "Tom!" came the frantic echo. He slid his finger over the cold trigger. "Never again will you scar me, Maria," he whispered. A single shot rang from the remnants of a place where pirates came to die. Bread, tea, life. A steaming loaf of bread. For the last year, Marco, a UX designer by profession and a baker by hobby, has been fighting forgetfulness. Not sure how it started. Maybe there was a medical reason. He'd lay in bed thinking a tumor was cooking in the corner of his brain, slowly degenerating his memory, closer to a stroke with each day. He didn't even know if brain tumors and strokes had to do anything with one another. He just knew both were bad and didn't want to know more. Or maybe it was all due to alcohol and cigarettes in his younger years. He used to drink and smoke heavily until the bad habits caught up with him at his friend's wedding 3 years ago. He woke up with a hangover, but it was a different type of hangover. His head felt like a malfunctioned computer that worked at 50% of its capabilities. His mind would turn on and off as he was waiting for breakfast. Then, after a fourth time going to breakfast to douse his face in cold water, his brain turned on entirely. He could almost feel the full power of consciousness kicking in. The probability that it might not happen next time scared him. Or maybe it was due to that tick bite he got 2 years ago. 2 weeks later, it turned out he had Lyme disease. It was discovered early, and he drank antibiotics. But you never know. Or maybe, actually, most likely, it was because the sorry excuse for a human that was his wife was driving him crazy. Constantly nagging. Never was everything fine. Always something wrong. And it was him that needed fixing. Never her. Or if she needed fixing, it was because of something he had done, even when what he was doing was good. For example, back when he didn't have a sustainable income, life was bad because she was carrying the financial weight. Then, when the tables turned and he became the one bringing in the money, life was bad because she felt useless. Then, all the diseases. One day, it's breast cancer. Then it's leukemia, only to be suspicious of an unknown bone disease. Next, the mental issues. Bipolarity, anxiety, panic attacks, depression. Marco had no problem with any of those. He was there to help. What ticked him off was the nerve to complain about his behavior when he had a bad week. It was understandable if she was in a rut, but God forgive, if it was the other way around. Then, he was a selfish and cold-blooded bastard. All of that was the reason for his panic attacks. Marco has never had them before as long as he could remember. Then, he'd get sudden panic attacks while waiting for her to finish her shopping or while on a bus. It would happen out of the blue. He'd have a perfect day, then a sudden surge in the brain and panic. The result was panicking about a possible next panic attack. He couldn't remember if this was before or after his friend's wedding. It was a long time ago. Too many events to remember the exact time. Finally, the tea. The apartment was full of tea. Green tea, black tea, Earl Grey, matcha, chamomile, desert delight, 1001 nights, the Gauss flights. All these general and random names. And okay, it was fine. Nothing wrong with someone enjoying tea. But she'd buy one. God knows it would be outside her budget. Drink it once, and then leave it in the cupboard. Like a lunatic collector. But instead of LP records, it was tea. Anyways, Marco stopped for a second. What was he doing again? It was always like this. He'd be doing one thing, start thinking about her the next, get angry, and then forget about closing the fridge door. He looked at the still hot loaf of bread. He took the knife and cut into it. Steam was dancing from it and mixing with the kitchen. A perfect concoction of tasteless air and oven-fresh pleasantness. Then he looked at a small bottle next to it. Was he really going to poison her? What a crazy thought. He still couldn't believe how he managed to get his hands on the poison. The poison needed to have no flavor. He didn't want to jeopardize the bread, but could he do it? Now that the moment has arrived, could he kill? No. Could he kill another person? His wife, out of all people. He wasn't that type of person. The ones you read about in the news, they are always ugly, weird, and either too thin or too fat. He wasn't that. He liked people, and people liked him. Unlike the fat and the thin, he had a reason. She brought him to this point. He'd never do it for pleasure. His action was justifiable. He cut 2 pieces of bread and put them on a plate. He opened the fridge and took some ham and cheese. Next, he cut both ham and cheese into fine finger food pieces and decorated them next to the bread. The fridge light helped him see better. He picked up the plate, took a deep breath, and walked towards the living room. He stopped. Wait. Did he put the poison in the dough before baking the bread? He remembered pondering whether to lace the bread before or after. It made sense to do it before. But what if the heat neutralized the poison? Unlikely, but it could happen. He should have used more than a few drops. What's the worst that could happen if he didn't? He chuckled. She'd die even more? Huh. Snap out of it, Marco. Did you put the poison or not? He grabbed the bottle and brought it to his eye level. He jigged the small brown bottle to see if there was less poison than before. No idea. He pulled the cork and smelled the poison. No smell. What was he expecting? Damn fridge. Always forget to close it. Marco slammed the fridge door. What to do? What to do? Maybe he should roll with it. And if it works, it works. If not, he'll try again. No. That means he'd have to hide the poison somewhere in the apartment until the opportunity arrives. He couldn't live with the stress, not with all the cleaning she does every single day. Bake another bread? But what if she arrives while he's baking the second bread, and the first bread is already on the table? How would he explain that? His gaze stopped at the tea cupboard. He grabbed the chamomile, mint, lavender, rosemary, and clove mix, turned on the stove to boil water. 250 milliliters exactly. He shoved a teaspoon into the mix and combined it with water. Then he waited for 5 minutes. The tea was ready. Just don't forget, a bitter choice. The first thing he could recognize was an old, musty, wet scent. He's groggy, his mouth is dry, and his head hurts, but he feels warmth on his face. With that, he hears a crackling fire. Attempting to lift his hand to his face, he realizes his hands are tied. His feet are tied. He opens his eyes and can see that he is tied to a chair. His eyes get used to the fire's dim light, and he is seated in an old, dusty room with wooden beams at a small round table with a teapot and teacup in the middle. He smells the scent of steeping tea. He starts to feel panic and realizes that he is well and indeed tied to the chair, and he's not getting out. His mind races like anyone's would in this predicament. Who did this? Why me? Why am I here? His usual defensive bravado kicks in, but he quickly realizes there's no one here to impress, to convince, or so he initially thought. Swiveling his head, looking around for anything to help him escape, a way out, or a clue as to where he is, he yelps when he sees her. There, by the fire, a young woman stands. She is tall, curvier than he prefers, and simply dressed. She doesn't make a single sound. She seems calm as she continues looking into the flames while holding her cup of tea and quietly sipping. Who the hell is she? At first, he thinks this is a first date gone wrong, but then he sees her face, and he recognizes her. I know her, but his head is so foggy. Did she drug me? He can't place her face. He feels the first beads of sweat dripping down his face as he tries to look around for someone else to help or something to lean against to free himself. Looking around and listening, he confirms they are the only two here. Where the hell am I? Is this a cottage? In New York City? After spending precious moments trying to make sense of this, he shakes it off and starts to take in more of the space, thinking of creative ways to get himself free. If I can just get free, she's just one woman. He thinks to himself, I've managed worse. She doesn't acknowledge his panic. She slowly looks at the fire and sips her tea. If she's this calm, she has a plan. He could handle emotions, tears, and outbursts. But calm women never spelled a good time to him. Noticing him finally, the woman looks over at him, and it barely registers on her face that he is awake. She takes another sip of tea and moves to the table, taking the other seat across from him. She looks down at her hands and places them on the table. Only then does he see her entire face when she looks him in the eye. He is immediately filled with fear. Fuck, he says, and stills in, struggling with his restraints. She smiles lightly at his remark. I knew you to be more eloquent than that, waving it off. But again, I did catch you off guard, catching himself. He prepares to put on a show. Ellie, what's going on? What happened? How are we here? How are you here? I thought you had left the country. I've been so worried about you. I tried to write a call or text, but I didn't have your information. You have no idea how worried I've been after everything you've gone through, what we've gone through. She said nothing and continued staring at him with the calm, blank stare she'd had when she first sat down. Look, honey, what happened was horrible. So many terrible losses and accidents. When your brother... He paused when he heard her quick inhale. Her head whipped to the side like she had been slapped. And when she looked back at him, he saw fury in her eyes. If this is about the money, I can pay you. But you have no right to do this. To what? Kidnap me? Drug me? What else are you going to do? You don't have the guts to do any real damage. What do you think is going to happen? Let's talk this out, like calm adults. You're making a mountain from a molehill. Nothing that happened was my fault. He was about to dig into his routine defense that he'd done during police questioning and lawyers listening. But she held up a hand. Martin, it's not about money. It never was for our family. Though I know that's all you understand. So this may be a tough concept. It's about the truth. She stands slowly, gracefully grabbing the teacup and placing it before him, pausing to take a look at him. The first proper look she's taken of him in 5 years since everything happened. You'd think with all that money, you'd have taken better care of yourself. She moves the tea kettle closer to the cup and settles back in her chair. I was surprised how big you've gotten. I'm grateful I got the extra rope. Otherwise, you wouldn't be so snug and cozy on that chair," she said, sitting back and putting her hands in her lap. Martin looks at the teacup. It's empty. Then he looks at the tea kettle. He can see steam rising from the spout and smell tea. He looks back at her and sees that she has a calm, serene smile. "What the fuck do you want, Ellie?" he says, defeated, realizing he will have to play whatever game she has set up and outsmart her, like he does with everyone. "I've made you a soothing tea, but I want to tell you a story first," she says. And he sees a brief shadow of darkness across her face. Was it a shadow? Or is it her anger? Either way, it can't be good. She takes a deep breath and begins her tale. There was a family, a happy and loving family. They weren't perfect, no one was, but they were happy. A mother, a father, a daughter, and a younger brother. They had been building a nice estate as a family since her brother was back from college, and their daughter was running their company business. Combined, their wealth was not something to write to the Times about, but it afforded them a lifestyle and attention. They were comfortable, happy, giving much back to their community, and always the first people to help those in need. Reaching back for her own tea, she sipped. Then a man introduced himself. The man saw that their kindness and eagerness to help were things to be preyed upon and taken advantage of. "That's where you come in, Martin," she said, leaning her elbows on the table and putting her head in her hands. He could tell she was comfortable, so he listened, waiting for his time to strike. This charming, crass, but witty man came to this family with an opportunity to do so much good. "You did your homework there, didn't you, Marty? Knowing my father had been dying to help those less fortunate in other parts of the world, but didn't have the gift or health to travel like he'd like. So you offered your assistance." She continued, "Look, your father was an adult and made a decision he shouldn't have. It's not my fault he was as gullible as he was fragile in health." Martin interjected, but it didn't move or ruffle her as he hoped. Again, he could deal with outbursts and emotions, but that calm quiet unnerved him. "My father trusted you. He gave you a sum of money the first time. I don't want to know how you substantiated the positive works the money did for those families," she said, leaning back and drumming her fingers on the table. "AI has come a long way these days. It's not my fault he couldn't see the flaws." He tried to add that charm, but failed because he kept looking back at the tea. "Is it poisoned? Is she going to kill me with the teapot? Seems a bit violent for her," he thought. But he'd been surprised by her already. She scoffed at his remark. "You continued to take his money and show these manufactured images and proof of goodwill for 2 years, until he gave you access to our funds." without knowing you had cheated him. You promptly drained those funds, millions of dollars, and disappeared, funneling the money to an untraceable account. No court would mandate a warrant or search for you. Again, sweetie, it's not my fault your father was an idiot, and you could have stopped him, he said, thinking the sweat from his palms could help loosen the rope around his wrists. She went on. The stress of this loss and the bureaucratic failing that is our justice system caused my already fragile father to suffer a heart attack and die, leaving my mother a husk of a woman. I had to step away from the business and take care of her. My brother took over the company. You had thoroughly gutted those funds to barely enough to keep the lights on. The debt drowned my brother and his sanity, and he took his own life. The loss of both men caused my mother to stop living. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't sleep. She just wept. Until one day, she just stopped breathing. The doctors say it was a brain aneurysm. It was heartache, she says with tremendous confidence. She gets up and goes to the fire. He sees her shaking. Is it from the cold or from anger? He continues his slow struggle to free his hand from the ropes, but knows it won't do any good. He just has to wait and see how this plays out. Look, Ellie, I'm sorry this all happened to you. I really did send some money to those charities. He had to, he thought. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to get their government-valid invoice for his tax write-offs, which he forged. And everything that happened to your family, you can't blame those freak incidents on me. It just doesn't make sense. And you've always been a sensible woman. Let's just talk like adults, and we can find the reason behind all this. He began preparing more excuses, but he saw that she didn't even react. She took a slow breath while staring into the fire. You ruined us for nothing but greed. He didn't know what to say, so she turned and stared at him. For greed, she whispered. Taking her time, she returned to the table and picked up the teapot. Keeping eye contact with him, she poured the tea into the cup. She placed the teapot back down on the table. Stepping behind him, she stills. In that pregnant pause of silence, horrifying scenarios rush into his mind. Is she going to smash my face against the table? Was it a ploy? Is she going to slit my throat or strangle me? He hears her take a deep breath, unties one of his hands, and slowly takes her seat across from him, unafraid of what he might do with one hand free. The tea is yours, Martin. A gift from me, she says, leaning back in the chair. He looked at the cup. The dark liquid smelled rich and fragrant. Was it poisoned? Maybe. Maybe not. If she wanted to kill him, wouldn't she have done it already? Why wait so long? Why all the dramatics? Was she testing his conscience? Joke's on her. He doesn't think he has one. A twisted act of mercy? Instead of a violent death, he would likely have had from the latest con. He'd definitely turned on the wrong family. That was not his best work. He'd been getting sloppy. So what? He drinks it? If he refuses, will she force him? He stares at the cup. As I said before, this is about trust. It's about faith in kindness, in my kindness. Do you have that faith, Martin? Pausing, she watches his internal struggle. Take a drink, Martin, she says, leaning forward. He could throw it in her face as a distraction, but it's not hot enough to do any damage, and he still would be stuck in this chair. It wouldn't distract her enough to manage an escape. And if I don't? He asks quietly. She cocked her head to the side and knowingly smiled, confirming that if he didn't, she'd force it. With a deep breath and trembling hand, he lifts the cup to his lips and drinks. He watches her face as the warm, bitter tea slides down his throat. He stares at her as he waits to feel anything. His heart pounds. Is this it? Or is it nerves? What else will I start feeling? Throat burning? Organ failure? Ellie watches him in silence. Her expression is unreadable. 1 minute passes, then another, and another. He feels no pain. Was there even any poison? Was it just tea? He laughs nervously with relief. He can feel sweat dripping from his face. That's it? That was your big revenge? Making me squirm and sweat? Sneering at her. I knew you didn't have it in you. Weak, just like your whole family. Ellie smiles and leans closer, whispering, Who said the poison works fast? Martin's smug smile falters. He looks at the cup, the back at Ellie's serene face. What do you mean? He blurts out between panicked breaths. She stands and picks up her coat, and he sees her demeanor change to light and easy. Some things take time, Marty. She pauses and smiles at him. It could be days. It could be weeks. It could be in your sleep. It could be during your favorite meal. And it causes a devastating reaction. It could be tomorrow in a crowded room. You'll just have to wait and see and hope. She tosses a kid's Swiss Army knife on the table and walks out. He stares at the closed door in horror. He's alive, for now. But for how long? The fear will never leave him. With every meal, every sip, every breath, he will wonder if it will his last. Before the last light fades, the sky hung heavy with smoke, the distant cries of the oppressed swallowed by the towering buildings of a city once free. A mother and daughter weaved through the shadows, their breath shallow, their hands concealed beneath tattered gloves, Vale gripped Iris's tiny hand as they maneuvered through the ruins of their former home. Each step, a calculated whisper in the night. The Iron Thorns brand was the mark of submission or death, and they would take neither. The air carried the scent of decay, a putrid reminder of the regime's cruelty. People slithered through the alleyways, gaunt faces avoiding eye contact, knowing that even a glance could spell their doom. The regime's soldiers patrolled the streets like reapers clad in black, their glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness, hunting those who dared remain unmarked. The execution of Vale's husband, Iris's father, still burned in their minds. The smell of charred flesh haunted their nostrils. The crackling flames, the mocking laughter of the soldiers, the silence of the crowd. It all replayed in their nightmares. They had to keep moving, had to survive, had to evade the fate that had claimed him. Tonight was another night of scavenging. A half-crumbled restaurant stood at the corner of a ruined boulevard, its once vibrant walls now covered in soot and graffiti. Vale pulled Iris inside, keeping close to the walls. The scent of rotting food and stale air filled their lungs. The mother worked quickly, rifling through drawers, picking out anything edible, while Iris stood guard near the entrance. A sound, boots against concrete. Vale stiffened, signaling for Iris to stay silent. Soldiers, their red eyes glowed from the entrance as they fanned into the restaurant, their movements calculated, methodical. They began inspecting hands, searching for those unmarked by the Iron Thorn. Vale pulled Iris back, creeping toward a darkened hallway. A misplaced step, a brush against cold metal fork clattered to the floor. The sharp clang cut through the silence like a gunshot. Heads turned, red eyes locked onto them. Vale wasted no time. She yanked Iris's wrist and ran, her heart hammering in her chest. They pushed through a door, locking it behind them. A window, their only escape. Go! Vale hoisted Iris up as the door behind them rattled. The girl scrambled through, dropping onto the cold alley below. The door splintered. Vol lunged through, just as the soldiers burst inside. Shouts erupted, radio static crackling to life. Lights flickered on across the street as people stirred. Gunfire roared. A searing pain tore through Vale's leg as she shoved the door of a rundown building open. She collapsed onto the floor, biting back a scream. Blood pooled beneath her as she dragged herself into the shadows, Iris clutching her arm, tears welling in her terrified eyes. Vale took her daughter's face in her hands. Listen to me. You have to hide. No, Mom. Please, Iris. Vale's voice cracked. Stay hidden. no matter what happens. With trembling hands, she guided Iris into a closet, barely illuminated by the moonlight streaming through a broken window. Iris clamped her hands over her mouth to stifle her sobs. The boots arrived. Heavy, unyielding. A soldier stepped into the room, scanning the darkness. Vale lay in wait. When the first soldier stepped through, she struck, sending him to the ground. But there were more. Too many. A rifle butt slammed into her face, and she tasted blood. Her vision blurred. The room spun. More boots. More fists. She barely registered her own teeth, breaking as she hit the ground. Through swollen eyes, Vale turned ever so slightly toward the closet, toward Iris. A soldier noticed. He stepped toward the door. The closet burst open. Iris flew forward, her father's pocket knife in her tiny hand. She plunged it into the soldier's thigh. A scream. A gunshot missed its target as the soldier reeled back. But then a massive hand swung, sending Iris crashing into the wall. "No! No!" Vale's voice was hoarse, raw with anguish. She tried to crawl forward to Iris, but a boot slammed down on her spine, pressing her into the filth-ridden floor. A soldier began inspecting their hands for the mark of the iron thorn. But there was no mark. A soldier crouched beside her, those glowing red eyes consuming her vision. "We have plans for you." Darkness swallowed her whole. Days passed in black silence, interrupted only by the sound of rats skittering across damp stone. The air was thick with rot. Vale and Iris were dragged from their cell, their chains clinking, their bodies weak. The execution grounds reeked of gasoline and old death. The earth beneath them was blackened, littered with ash. The crowd gathered, silent, afraid. Vale pulled Iris close, pressing a kiss on her forehead. "I love you, Iris. I love you too, Mom." Tears streaked down their faces, their fingers entwined. The soldiers poured gasoline over them, the cold liquid seeping into their clothes, filling their nostrils with its acrid scent. The crowd watched in silence, some with vacant stares, others with barely concealed horror. One soldier stepped forward, a Molotov in hand, his voice a cruel mockery. "I love you too." Laughter erupted behind him. The glass shattered. Chaos exploded. Flames roared. But not from the Molotov. It came from the sky, from behind the buildings. Rebels. Gunfire cracked through the air. The soldiers scattered, scrambling to defend against an unseen enemy. The crowd erupted, some running, some standing frozen in place. Vale, weak, but driven by desperation, tore at the chains. A stray bullet shattered the lock. She ripped her bindings free, grabbed Iris, and ran. Through the chaos, they stumbled into an alley, their lungs burning, their limbs barely obeying their commands. The city screamed behind them, but for now, they were free. Vale collapsed against a wall, cradling Iris against her chest, her fingers running through the girl's tangled hair. The child trembled, clutching her mother's torn cloak. "We're okay," Vale whispered, her voice cracked and fragile. "We're okay." Iris buried her face into her mother's shoulder, sobs racking her tiny frame. "I thought we were going to die." Vale held her tighter, pressing a kiss against her head, rocking her gently. "Not today, my love. Not today." The night still loomed. The regime still reigned. But for this fleeting moment, they had each other. And that was enough. Toxic confections. Beep, beep. Catherine put on her oven mitts and pulled out the hot tray of chocolate chip cookies from the oven. She turned the oven off before the timer could beep again. Working quickly, she lifted the cookies off the sheet and onto a cooling rack. She cleaned as she went, making sure not to leave any crumbs on the counter or any dirty dishes out. Brendan would be coming home shortly, and she wanted everything to be perfect. She had gone out earlier to buy a large brown rug for the living room and situated it underneath the coffee table. She had seen rugs used in the movies. She was careful to use cash, as she didn't want the purchase on her credit card. Catherine hoped he wouldn't notice the new rug right away, but if he did, she'd just tell him she wanted to spruce the place up a bit, which she rarely ever got to do. Their home was always so clean and welcoming, though. Nothing was ever out of place. Brendan's friends loved coming over here for football Sundays. She would shower them with snacks, beer, and witty commentary as she portrayed herself as the perfect housewife. She checked the clock. 3:44 p.m. He would be getting home in less than half an hour. Her breathing quickened, and her heart starting beating hard against her chest. She'd been meticulously planning this for weeks, and now it was only 20 mins away from happening. If this doesn't work, I'm dead. This needs to work. She had gone to the library and read through too many books to get this wrong. Everything, down to the measurements she needed. And the phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Hello?" Catherine slowly picked up the phone on the edge of the counter. She wasn't allowed to have a cell phone, so the only other option was a landline, which sucked because it had no caller ID, so she often had to deal with telemarketers. "Hey, Kat, how are you?" The familiar voice on the other end asked. Her sister was one of the only people in her life that still talked to her. Catherine had slowly pushed everyone else away over the last few years, becoming quite isolated. "Hi, Becca. I'm good. How are you? How's Brian? The kids?" she asked, trying to sound normal and hoping the answers would be quick so that she could get back to preparing for tonight. "We're all great. I hope we can get together soon. It feels like I haven't seen you in ages. We need to go for dinner or drinks soon. Becca exclaimed. "She always sounds so bubbly and happy. I wish I could be like that," Catherine thought to herself. "Maybe one day soon. Yes, I'd love to. Sorry, I've been so busy lately with work. I just haven't gotten around to seeing anyone. We will hang out soon, though. I promise." This was a lie. Catherine hadn't worked in 3 years, but she'd been lying for so long about it that changing her story now felt impossible. The truth was, she couldn't let her sister see the bruises and cuts that marked her body, the ones that showed up too often and were sometimes too hard to hide. A week ago, one of Catherine's old classmates from college had recognized her when she was at dinner with Brendan. A tall, attractive man she had known only because they had done a couple of group projects together in English class. She did her best to end the conversation quickly, feigning disinterest, but the damage was already done. The drive home that night was silent. But as soon as they got through the front door, Brendan screamed at her, accused her of cheating with this man, whose name she couldn't even remember. "You are such a whore. You open your legs for every man out there, don't you? Am I not good enough for you? Is that it? You think you can do better than me? No, I barely even know him." In between sobs, Catherine had tried to reassure him that nothing was going on. "I haven't spoken to him since college, and nothing ever happened between us." "Bullshit!" His fist hit her in the stomach first. When she keeled over in pain, he pushed her backwards into the wall. She fell onto the floor, and he continued kicking her in the legs, ribs, arms, anywhere but her face. He knew that wasn't so easily covered up like the rest. She put her arms up to protect herself, begging him to stop, and he eventually backed off, only to grab a glass from the cupboard and throw it at the wall just above her head before leaving the room. Glass rained down, scraping her head and arms. A trickle of blood rolled down from her forehead into the corner of her eye, blurring her vision. This wasn't the worst he'd ever done to her, but it still cut deep. The physical pain stung, but the emotional agony was far worse. How could the person she loved treat her like this? She lay there on the floor for an hour before forcing herself upright and cleaning up the broken glass. Brendan was already asleep, so she showered, bandaged herself up, changed into pajamas, and got into bed beside him, all the while planning her escape. Brendan was used to her forgiving him every time he had one of these episodes. He was very good at manipulating the situation to make her feel like it was all her fault. He would buy her flowers, tell her he didn't mean to hurt her, but that it wouldn't have happened if she hadn't entertained him, been so careless, left such a huge mess for him, etc. She was always the one who ended up apologizing. Little did he know She had wanted to leave him for months, but was terrified that he may actually kill her if she tried. She was also always a little hopeful that he would change, because she did still love him, as much as she tried not to. After the last 3 times, though, she no longer cared if he changed or not. She needed to get herself out of this permanently. "Kat, you there?" Becca's voice startled her back to the present. "Sorry. Yes, I'm here. Just distracted. Still have so much to do before Brendan gets home. I don't want him to see this mess. Plus, I have to make dinner and do the laundry still. Can I call you tomorrow?" "Yeah, of course." Becca paused. "You know, he could be helping you with some of that, too. You shouldn't put so much pressure on yourself." She had never liked Brendan, had tried to convince Catherine not to marry him because she got a bad vibe from him. Too bad Catherine hadn't listened. "I know. I'll talk to him. Love you. Bye. Love you too." Catherine hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Bending down, she reached under the sink, behind the garbage can, and pulled out the bottle of cyanide. Again, she poured a tablespoon of it into a teacup, then started boiling some water. She had decided on this method because she had read that it was clean, simple, and often used by housewives with horrible husbands. There would be no messy cleanup, and it was so easy to slip something into his food or drinks without being detected. One thing he did appreciate about her was her cooking skills. She knew her way around a kitchen, and he always ate everything she made. She had mixed in a good amount of cyanide into the cookies, hoping he would eat a lot of them. But just in case, she would also be putting some in his tea, which would be waiting for him on the coffee table when he got home, next to a plate of cookies. If he offered her some, she had planned on her excuse being that she had already eaten one, and that was enough. Brendan liked her skinny, and often commented on how much she ate, so he would understand. Just as she finished mixing the cream and sugar into his tea, she heard the sound of Brendan's tires crunching gravel on the driveway. She looked out the window to see him climbing out of his car. Catherine took one more quick look at everything she had prepared. "I think this is it. This either works or it doesn't. He dies or he kills me. Either way, I'll be out of this hell." He came through the door, tossing his briefcase down on the ground. "Honey, I'm home. Where's my kiss?" Brendan called out. Catherine hurried over, reaching up to give him a quick peck before helping him with his coat. She felt a slight twinge of sorrow as she realized this would likely be their last kiss. But she pushed that thought out of her mind by reminding herself how he has treated her these last few years. He'd isolated her, insulted her, beat her, made her feel like she was worthless, and then made her think everything was her own fault. fuck him. I made your favorite browned butter chocolate chip cookies. Come have a seat, she offered, putting on a big, fake smile as she hung his coat on the coat rack. Great. I'm starving. I had a rough day at work today, he said, taking a seat on the couch. She noticed he didn't say thank you, as though this kind of greeting was just expected of her and warranted no appreciation. She watched as he took a sip of the Earl Grey cyanide tea and then a bite of one of the cookies. These are delicious. They taste a little different than usual, Brendan said. Yeah, I tried something a little different today. Catherine smiled at him. It's good. Hey, is this a new rug? He finally noticed, taking in the brown, patterned, synthetic fiber rug below his feet. Catherine's heart jumped, but she remained calm. She had prepared for this. Yeah, I saw it today and thought it would look perfect in our living room. And later, you'll look perfect, all rolled up in it, she thought to herself, holding back a smirk. Well, I think a gray rug would have been better. We will have to pick out a nicer one this weekend. Nice effort, though. He finished one cookie and started on another, taking a sip of tea in between. So condescending. I can't wait till he shuts up for good. Okay, baby, she said, turning around and heading into the kitchen so he couldn't see her expression change to annoyance. Catherine pulled the water jug out of the fridge and poured herself a glass. Behind her, she heard Brendan cough and say, I'm not feeling too well. Did you do something to these? She turned around in time to watch him vomit on the new carpet and clutch his head. His head must be killing him by now. Headaches and vomiting are some of the first symptoms of cyanide poisoning. He laid his head back on the couch, dazed. I'll have to make sure he doesn't leave any vomit on the couch, too. I really don't feel good. Call an ambulance, he begged, quietly. His body began to shake with convulsions. Seizures were another symptom. Catherine stayed silent, watching as he slowly stopped seizing, and then breathing all together. She quietly took pride in freeing herself from such a monster. Someone who pretended to love her, only to hurt her more deeply than she'd ever been hurt, was truly monstrous in her eyes. She felt a wave of relief wash over her as she mourned the last 5 years of her life. No one should ever have to endure the kind of abuse she had. And now, he could never hurt her or anyone else ever again. Now, all that remained was to get rid of his body. A small smile tugged at her lip as she set to work. Is that a train? With extreme speed, the wind brushed against my face, blew my hair into my eyes, and tangled it around my head and neck. I clawed at the long red strands as I watched clouds begin to swirl, moving into a large circular motion. 12 o'clock, noon, and the skies were as dark as night. The few clouds that showed up against the dark sky were as huge, grayish, white pillows running across the sky. The wind became swifter and colder in a matter of seconds. I ran towards the house for shelter as fast as my legs could carry me. Then the rain came. Large, hard drops that pelted my unprotected head with a fierceness I had never experienced. I slammed through the door, ran about the house, closing all the windows that were opened to beat the heat and humidity. The wind whistled through the walls of the old clapboard homestead with a vengeance. Down the 6 steep steps to the basement, I ran, spotted the old handheld radio, and quickly grabbed it. Rolling through the channels, there was nothing but static. I tore the back off to check for batteries. Empty. Stumbling across the bold orange, black, and yellow, striped outdoor carpet, I headed back up the stairs toward the kitchen. My anxious pull on the utility storage drawer was more aggressive than intended. It flew across the room, slammed against the opposite wall as its contents soared around the room. I located the batteries and began to move in that direction. Then, out went the lights. I had lived in that house my entire life, 35 years. But it was still difficult to find my way across the room on my hands and knees in the dark. Finally, I made it across the room. In the process, I rammed my head into the cabinet door. The batteries lay within reach. After slamming the batteries into the old radio, I ran back to the basement to find a flood. Water rising, now licked at the 2nd step from the bottom. Suddenly, the rain stopped, and the wind stopped blowing. It was too quiet. I looked out the back door window. The sky, still black as night, made it hard to see what was going on in the sky above. I looked all around. Nothing but blackness. There was a deafening sound. I looked around to find the source, but it was too dark to see anything from my viewpoint. The leaves on the trees rustled, then fell to the ground. The noise was so intense, I thought I was hearing things. A low whistle, accompanied by a chuka, 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 mixed with a loud scream that grew into something painful. I covered my ears with my hands, unsure if the scream came from me or elsewhere. I ran from the house and across the street to my neighbor's yard and the safety of their basement home. As a child, both of my parents worked nights. They had instructed me, as well as my 3 siblings. If there is ever a chance of a tornado, run across the street to the Williams house. Their entire home is a basement and the safest place to be in a bad storm. We lived in the Midwest, where I still resided, and people had called our area Tornado Alley because the tornadoes almost always came right through our neighborhood. This caused destruction, with much expense for replacing things like roofs, sheds, cars, and trucks, and sometimes even livestock. As an adult, I still take my parents' instructions to heart and run to my neighbor's house when necessary. Alice opened the door and dragged me in. That's when I saw the source of the eerie sound. "Is that a train?" I asked Alice, my neighbor, even as the question sounded ludicrous to my ears. A train in the sky? That was impossible, wasn't it? "No, Opal dear. That's a funnel cloud," Alice answered. "A what?" I looked out the window after she shut the door behind me. "A tornado." She dragged me away from the door. "Come, we must hurry." She rushed us into the middle of the house, sat me on the floor next to a sofa placed against the wall, and covered us with a heavy blanket. The train was now overhead. I remember being in many tornadoes as a kid, but I don't remember hearing anything like the noise I heard then. I was more afraid during that storm than I had ever been before. After the train sounds left and the rain started coming down again, Alice went into the kitchen to make us some sweet hot cocoa with marshmallows. Alice was the daughter of the people that I had run too many years ago, and the cocoa recipe was one of her mom's. I would never have told my own mother this, but it was the best I had ever had. When we heard the all-clear sirens, we opened the door and looked out at the sun-shining afternoon. Alice's yard had no large trees for branches to break off of, or leaves to clutter her lawn. But the family always had a huge garden with potatoes, carrots, lettuce, tomatoes, and many other things like stalks of corn and assorted colors of peppers. Unfortunately for Alice, it looked like there was going to be a lot of canning going on at her house very soon. There were trees that grew to the side of their house along the roadside, but they were evergreens, stout and dense. I remember hiding behind them to block the wind as we waited for the school bus. There was an entire row of 6, and on frigid days, other kids would walk to the Williamses' yard just to use the tree block. Sometimes 7 or 8 of us, all huddled there together for warmth. The evergreens were planted there as protection from high winds and storms. It seemed to work. At least it worked that day. I looked across the road toward my house and noticed the roof would need some shingles replaced, something I had learned to do at an early age, since we lost them so many times. Most insurance companies want to charge a premium for living in that area now, due to recurring claims, but it's worth it most of the time. If it's only a few shingles, I normally wouldn't have bothered with the claims. I would just do the job and have done with it. That practice also kept my policy premiums down. When I got home, I toured the house looking for damage, which was aplenty. 2 broken windows. Our shed had blown over the fence into my next-door neighbor's yard, crumbled against one of their trees into a large metal ball. Other than the flooded basement, the rest of the house looked in surprisingly decent shape. The water in the basement would recede in time, and with the application of a little mold repellent, the standing water cleanup should be fairly easy. I now know what a tornado sounds like. I guess I've been lucky over the years. That was the only time I was that close to a tornado. I used to hear stories from folks in the area talking about seeing and hearing a tornado. Each tale was just a little different. Some said it was like an airplane coming in for a landing. Others said it was like a car crash with metal tearing and brakes squealing. I only ever heard one person say it sounded like a freight train. Wheels rolling over tracks, brakes squealing, and cars swaying from side to side as they took the curves. I can attest. That is the sound I believe a tornado to be like. A train. Strange paint. Deborah had always been a solitary artist, pouring her heart and soul into her work in a dimly lit studio that smelled of turpentine and linseed oil. Her latest masterpiece was a vibrant canvas depicting a mystical forest, alive with creatures that seemed to shimmer and dance under the flickering light of a nearby candle. As she painted the final stroke, the colors swirled and shimmered, as if the very essence of life had been captured within the frame. Unbeknownst to her, the painting was not just a piece of art. It was a portal to another realm, one that thrummed with whispers and secrets waiting to be uncovered. One stormy night, a curious art collector named Harold stumbled upon Deborah's gallery. He was immediately drawn to her latest creation, the forest, alive with colors that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Despite the warnings of the gallery owner, who sensed an unsettling energy emanating from the painting, Harold insisted on purchasing it. He felt an inexplicable connection to the artwork, as if it called out to him, promising wonders beyond his imagination. That night, he hung the painting in his study, entranced by its beauty and unaware of the darkness lurking within. Harold could not look away from the painting as the clock struck midnight. The figures within it, elusive woodland creatures and ethereal beings, began to shift and move, their eyes glinting with mischief and allure. They beckoned him closer, their whispers growing louder, promising secrets of the universe and glimpses of forgotten dreams. Each night, Harold returned to the painting, his heart racing with excitement and fear as he felt himself slipping deeper into its enchanting world. Days turned into weeks, and Harold's life began to unravel. He neglected his work, and isolation became his companion. Friends and family expressed their concern, but he brushed them aside, captivated by the beauty and mystery of the painting. In the quiet hours of the night, he would sit before the canvas, losing track of time as the figures danced and twirled, drawing him into their virulent realm where reality blurred into fantasy. The whispers became more urgent, more insistent, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. One fateful night, driven by an insatiable curiosity, Harold reached out to touch the canvas. The moment his fingers brushed against the surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, and he felt himself pulled into the painting. The colors enveloped him, swirling around him like a tempest, and in an instant, he was no longer in his study, but standing in the very heart of the enchanted forest. The creatures surrounded him, their laughter echoing like chimes in the wind, and he felt a sense of belonging that he had never known before. As days turned into nights in this new reality, Harold became a part of the painting, a mere shadow of his former self. He danced with the creatures, forgetting the life he had left behind, lost in a world where time held no meaning. Yet, deep within him, a flicker of awareness remained, a whisper of the life he had abandoned. The forest, once a place of wonder, transformed into a labyrinth of shadows, and the creatures he had once adored began to reveal their true nature, deceptive and sinister. In the end, Harold understood too late that the enchanting world of Deborah's painting was a trap, a seductive illusion that fed on his very essence. As he stood among the figures, now twisted and grotesque, he realized he had become one of them, a mere echo of a man who had once been alive. The painting hung in his study, a beautiful facade hiding the darkness within, whispering secrets to anyone who dared to gaze upon it, inviting them to join him in the eternal dance of despair. One rainy afternoon, a friend of Harold's, Claire, knocked on the door of his house. She had grown increasingly worried about him since he had purchased the painting. Harold hadn't returned her calls in weeks, and she felt an unsettling urgency to check on him in person. As she entered, the air felt thick, charged with an energy that sent a shiver down her spine. "Harold!" she called, her voice echoing through the dimly lit hallway. There was no response, only the sound of raindrops tapping against the window. Claire moved cautiously toward the study, her heart racing. The door creaked open, revealing the painting that had captivated Harold's very soul. She gasped as she stepped inside, the vibrant colors of the forest contrasting sharply with the shadows that loomed over the room. The painting seemed to pulse with life as Claire approached it, and she felt an inexplicable pull, as if the figures within were beckoning her to join them. But something was off. The forest looked darker than she remembered, and the laughter of the creatures now sounded like haunting whispers. "Harold!" she called again, her voice trembling. Suddenly, she noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye. It was Harold, standing eerily still before the painting, his gaze fixed on it as if he were entranced. She rushed to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Harold, are you okay? You've been gone for so long. I was worried sick." His head slowly turned to her, but his eyes were vacant, as if he were staring through her rather than at her. "Claire," he murmured, his voice distant. "You have to see. It's beautiful here. You can join me. We can be free." Fear gripped Claire as she looked back at the painting, where the creatures now gazed hungrily at her, their smiles widening. "Harold, this isn't right. You need to come back with me," she pleaded, shaking him gently, but he shook his head, a hint of desperation flickering in his eyes. "You don't understand. This is where I belong now. The forest. It holds everything I've ever wanted. You can't leave it. You have to stay." His voice grew softer, almost pleading. "You have to join us." Claire's heart raced as she realized the truth. The painting had ensnared Harold, twisting his mind and spirit, and now it was trying to lure her in as well. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to escape. "No, Harold! You have to fight it. This isn't you." At that moment, the creatures in the painting began to writhe and stretch, their forms becoming more grotesque, their laughter turning into a cacophony of chilling echoes. They reached out with elongated fingers, as if trying to break free from the confines of the canvas. The air grew heavy, thick, with a malevolent energy that made it difficult to breathe. "Join us, Claire," they chorused, their voices a twisted melody that tugged at her heart. "It's beautiful here. You'll never feel pain again." With a surge of resolve, Claire grabbed Harold's arm and pulled him away from the painting. "No, you're stronger than this. Remember who you are," she shouted, her voice breaking through the haze that enveloped him. For a brief moment, Harold blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Claire? What's happening?" "Just breathe," she urged, her grip tightening around his arm. "We have to get out of here." The creatures within the painting howled in fury, their vibrant colors darkening as they sensed their prey slipping away. The shadows in the room twisted and churned, threatening to swallow them whole. Claire pulled harder, dragging Harold away from the painting, and as they stumbled backward, the connection between him and the canvas began to fray. With one last desperate attempt, the creatures lunged forward, their claws reaching for Harold. But just as they were about to grasp him, Claire shouted, "No!" and yanked him out of the study, slamming the door shut behind them. They stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, the oppressive weight of the painting's energy dissipating. Claire turned to Harold, who was finally coming back to himself. confusion and fear etched on his face. "What just happened?" he gasped, shaking as if waking from a nightmare. "You were lost in that painting," Claire said, her voice trembling. "It was trying to take you, to keep you forever. But we escaped. You're safe now." As relief washed over Harold, he looked back at the closed door of his study, where the painting hung silently, its colors muted in the absence of his gaze. "I didn't realize. I thought I was free." Claire placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You were caught in its spell, but you're stronger than it. We need to get rid of that painting before it claims anyone else." With newfound determination, they returned to the study, where the painting seemed to loom larger, its colors still swirling with a hypnotic allure. Together, they hatched a plan to destroy it, to sever the bond it had formed with Harold, and ensure that no one else would fall victim to its seductive trap. As they prepared to confront the darkness within the canvas, they knew that the battle was far from over. The forest might have tried to claim Harold, but together they would fight to reclaim his freedom and banish the malevolent forces that lurked behind the vibrant colors. The whispers from the painting grew louder, but this time they would not be silenced. Repercussion. I remember the car crash that took my grandmother's life like it was yesterday. And when I say I remember, I mean vividly, because I was in the passenger seat. We hit an oncoming vehicle, trying to overtake on a blind bend. My grandmother seemed to register the car and sighed at the inevitable. Everything happened in slow motion. The sound of metal crushing, air whooshing past where it shouldn't. The man who was trying to overtake hit the driver's side of my car and ended up hitting a tree and burning to death after impact. It felt like we were spinning for ages. I had looked over at my grandmother, hunched over, a look of pure terror mirroring my own. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was told the woman in the third car avoided the crash completely and pulled up onto the grassy bank on the other side of the road from where the car was burning to call the police. My mother was a wreck for weeks after, ranting at me from the minute I opened my eyes in the hospital bed. "How could you let her drive, Anne? It was your car, your responsibility." The doctor, with his blue scrubs and shaved head, said it was a miracle. I only had a fractured wrist and concussion, considering my grandmother had split her head open, lost her arm with the car door, and had a heart attack as she bled out. I knew my mother's rage was mostly because I was unconscious for the last few moments of her mother's life, where she died alone and in pain. My father tried to reassure me that it wasn't my fault, but I knew it was. I knew she would still be here if I had driven. The morning of the crash, she had walked the mile or so. It was from her house to ours, hoping we could go shopping together, as she did almost every Saturday since I got my license. Because I idolized her, when she asked to drive us, I would always let her, every time. I wasn't allowed to visit her, lying in rest in the chapel. It will upset the aunts and uncles too much, was the excuse my mother used. She was the heart and soul of the family, you understand. But I didn't. She was my grandmother. She was part of me too. They should have let me say goodbye. A week after the funeral, the dreams started. She always turned up at the front door, asking if I wanted to go shopping with her, much like she did the morning of the crash. Those first few weeks, I always woke up not long after I saw her standing there, the terror jolting me out of the dream. I rarely dreamt before the crash. Sleep then had been beautiful blackness. I prayed for a dreamless sleep to return, growing weary of the overactive repetition of my sleeping mind. As time went on and winter came around, the dreams uncontrollably got longer. I would agree to drive her, and as I walked out the front door in my dream, she would start having a heart attack, falling to the ground in a pile of blood that rose from the grassy lawn. When I told my father about this, fearful of letting my mother know, he put it down to the medication I was on. He took me back to the doctors, who prescribed me something else to try. The dreams didn't stop, but they didn't get worse either. I tried to return to normal, going to volleyball practice and on date nights with my boyfriend, Phil. It worked for a little while. Nearly 2 months after the crash, I opened my curtains one morning and looked down at the lawn, as I had done every morning of my life, to see someone standing at the end of the drive, about 100 yards away. I didn't pay much attention to them the first day, or second. On the third day, the person moved a bit closer to the house, as if demanding to be seen. My grandmother looked up at me with a blank expression. I shut the curtains, trying to ignore the apparition. I was convinced death was coming to get me, so I stopped sleeping, afraid I wouldn't wake up. The lack of sleep meant grandmother was around more, stalking me from a closer proximity, standing behind me in the mirror as I washed my face in the morning, sitting in the back of the car when my mother took me to school, walking past me in the hallways at school. I was grateful she remained silent, and her right arm was still intact. She had given me a cross for my 10th birthday, and I dug it out of my closet and started wearing it constantly, hoping it would ward off her spirit, or at least trick my brain into warding her off. But the cross did nothing. I Googled ways to relax. It told me to take a bath and eat healthier food. I was barely eating, so I took a bath. Everything was okay, until the bath water turned bright red like fresh blood, and I passed out from a mixture of fear and lack of food. My mother found me hours later, prune-like and shivering in the water. "Can't you see it?" I said through chattering teeth. She looked over my body as if checking for injury. "See what?" What did you do? I spoke slowly, my voice raspy. The bath is filled with blood. My mother flinched, as though I had slapped her, then pulled the plug out and let the bath drain. Then she wrapped me in 3 towels and bundled me downstairs to sit in front of the fire, where I watched my grandmother's face dance behind the flames. One Saturday, at the height of my newfound insanity, as Phil was cooking us dinner in his family home, he called me by her name, Hazel. I got a head rush from the shock, and I closed my eyes for a few seconds while I waited for it to pass. When I opened my eyes again, my grandmother appeared in front of me, where I stood by the stove, smiling at me for the first time since she had appeared posthumously. I started screaming. Weeks of no sleep, being haunted by your dead grandmother, will eventually make you lose your mind. Phil couldn't calm me down and ended up calling my parents to come and get me. No one else could see her standing there smiling, her mouth twisted more to the right than I remembered. Her eyes followed me wherever I went in the room, but she remained in place. Maybe we need to take her to see a specialist, I heard my mother say to my father as I sobbed in the back seat of the car. She already has a doctor. There's something not right about her. Not anymore. She needs to see a psychiatrist or something. But the specialist, who prescribed me even more pills, told me repeatedly that at 17, I wasn't seeing my dead grandmother. You just have clinical exhaustion. You'll be fine. That night, I took the new pills I had been given to put me to sleep, only to be woken up by the feeling of hands around my neck, crushing my windpipe. I opened my eyes to see my grandmother standing over me as I lay in bed, unable to move. What a shame, my grandmother hissed, her voice deep and not at all the sweet sing-song voice she had in life. I needed her to stop haunting me. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I fought to get the words out. I would do anything to trade places with you. Anything. Her mouth pulled up slowly on the right side. Anything. I was gasping in the dark. No, not gasping. Choking. Choking on something in my throat. A snake crawled into my mouth and was snaking its way to my stomach. I could feel my lips around its slimy body. She's awake, I heard my mother say. Couldn't she see I was being suffocated? I peeled back my dry eyelids as the snake started to move, feeling a lot like this was the end. Especially when I was met with blinding light, blinking until the room came into focus. To first see the doctor with his shaved head, who was pulling a tube out of my mouth. Then I noticed my mother to the right of me, standing up next to the bed. Father sat beside her. Furthest away from me was my grandmother, standing in the doorway, her lips taut in a wry smile. I was going to be sick. It's okay, Anne. It's okay. My mother began, stroking my hair as soon as the doctor was finished. You were in an accident, but you're okay. This wasn't happening. Or rather, this had already happened, hadn't it? I went to wipe my tears away with my right hand, but for some reason, I couldn't move it. Grandmother still stood in the doorway, now expressionless. I tried to see what was trapping my right arm, but I couldn't see anything for the sheet covering me. "You were in a car crash, darling. You..." But my mother couldn't continue, breaking into sobs. I tried to say, "What?" but it came out all muffled and wrong. My tongue, somehow, too big for my mouth. My father was shaking his head. "You were in a car crash, Anne," grandmother said. Her voice that had evaded me for weeks was frail and dry. "The impact tore your right arm off." No, this wasn't happening. I was shaking my head frantically. The doctor was concerned with my heart rate and hyperventilation, injecting me with something that made the world go fuzzy. Grandmother moved closer to me in my haze, still not smiling. She seemed to be talking to my parents about something, but I couldn't hear them. The drugs were too powerful. Reality eventually slipped away, and I fell into a dreamless sleep for once. When I woke up, I opened my eyes to my dimly lit bedroom at home, looking exactly as it had on the morning of the crash. My heart was pounding in my chest. I kept telling myself it was a dream. It was all just a dream. The crash, the hospital, everything. But I was too scared to move, for fear I discovered my right arm was missing. So today's story has come to an end. Or perhaps it never really ended. There are mysteries still there, questions still unanswered, and sometimes things that seem to only exist in stories can creep into reality in unexpected ways. Are you sure that when you turn off the sound, everything around you will still be normal as before? Or is there something watching you? Either way, always remember that these are just stories, or at least we want to believe that they are. If you like moments of suspense, tension, and breathlessness, don't forget to follow me so you don't miss the next stories. And next time, when you come back, make sure you are ready, because what awaits you may be even scarier than you thought. See you again if you still have the courage to continue listening.